Dr. Shanitsky is going to tell you about anger.
Again, just as kind of a summary bringing us back, we always want to be able to make sure that our clients understand their emotions are not just mysterious kind of things that come to them or caused by people or situations, but in fact their emotions are statements of they themselves. Their emotions are statements of how they actually perceive the world, not reality. It's their perception of reality, because there's no universality to how anyone is going to be reacting to this situation. We want to talk about your emotions are statements of things that you're invested in. And then this last one is that your emotions are like emails to you from you. They are messages. And if you understand what these messages are, what the meanings of your emotions are, you can then deal with them. The second one that we want to talk about right now is anger. We all have patients who come to our practice and they have this lingering anger that stays with them. And the reality is that anger is never primary. It's always secondary. And if you help someone understand this, because they can only control themselves, they can't control someone else. If I say, I'm just angry, well, that sucks for me and there's nothing you can do about it. The reality is, and I always love to help educate the clients that I'm working with, is that anger happens for one of two reasons. Either something happened that you didn't want to have happen, or something didn't happen that you wanted to have happen. The reality is those things are interpersonal. Those are dealing with the world. Those can actually be addressed. So I had a young lad that I was working with who came and he said, Doc, I now understand why I'm so upset at my dad. My folks got divorced. And my dad makes these promises that we're going to get together for a weekend and we're going to do something. So my expectations are, I'm going to get together with my dad. But my dad has now moved on and he's got a new woman in his life and she's got her kids and he seems to prefer them, this new family, more than he prefers me. I feel neglected, I feel rejected, I feel secondary, I feel abandoned. So whenever we get together, I'm kind of all pissy the whole time. But now I understand this. When he says to his dad, I'm just, kind of irritated all the time, Dad's just saying, get over it. The reality is there's a dynamic relationship. And for him to be able to say, hey, wait, Dad, I love you. I expect to have us to be able to get together. You make a promise. I want to get together with you, and I feel this. This is a statement of me. I feel let down. I feel kind of less secondary. Dad's able to hear this versus just saying, I'm angry, or just being an irritable individual. Anger is never primary. It's always secondary. There's something happened that you didn't want it, or something didn't happen that you did want.
What is the message of sadness? When that light goes on in the dashboard and it reads sad, where does that come from? What does it mean? Sadness is about the perception of loss to something valuable. Remember before we talked about it's always about your investments? Anytime I'm sad, that's proof positive that I'm invested in something and I perceive that I have lost that something. Now again, all of our emotions are normal. Sadness is normal. You will not be able to do 80 or 90 years on planet Earth without experiencing sadness, because if there's one inevitability in this life, it's loss. And think about the kinds of losses you will sustain in a lifetime. How many people are still in touch with everyone in their first grade class? How many of you still have and ride your first bicycle, your first dog? In the town I work in, they don't even have their first hips. You lose your hair, you lose your waistline, you lose your parents. It's loss, it's divorce, it's families changing, it's friends dying prematurely. Sadness is our way of expressing I was invested, I'm invested, and I've lost. And the good news is, just like any of these other emotions, it's normal and it's healthy, but it has to be dealt with. And we're going to talk about the healing chapter, which is chapter 10. That's my baby. Hopefully we'll get there. But I want you to know that sadness is an important part of treatment with people. And here's another point. It's not depression. Sadness is not depression. We have a world where if someone goes in and talks to their primary care physician about an issue, they'll break into tears, and the physician will say, ooh, depression, and write out a script, when actually they should be saying, ooh, emotion. And the emotion, what does the emotion go back to? Their investment. They're talking about something really dear to them that's hurting in their lives. So it's not so much that they need an antidepressant, but they do need an opportunity to be able to express and release and heal. And sadness is our way of communicating to the self that there's something really valuable here to me that I've lost.
It's interesting, that statement about medication. I was at Hopkins, as I was saying, and here it is at the medical center there, that they always emphasize medication's never the primary intervention. Secondary. It's always least invasive first. That's right. And so, behavioral interventions first on everything. And unfortunately, our society has made this kind of cataclysmic shift into a direction which isn't always following protocol of the National Institute of Health and National Institute of Mental Health. And they're recommending it's behavioral first, then if need be, there's the combination of treatment, not singular by itself. Guilt. A lot of people wonder, where does their guilt come from? Now, obviously, some people are just guilt sponges. The family comes and visits to Florida, and it's not sunny, and it's rainy, and I feel terrible, and if you can come back down, I tell you, it's going to be wonderful. Guilt, a lot of people, when we love to ask this question about, what do you have to do in order to feel guilt? And people will say, well, I broke a law, I violated some social mores. Nope, not at all. Remember, your feelings are statements of you, your perceptions, what you're invested in. Guilt is a statement that you yourself have not lived up to your highest standard. Bernie Madoff, illegal, immoral, unethical, probably not an ounce of guilt. It is an amazing reality, even when he was caught. It was kind of this, I'm bummed out that I'm caught and I'm about to lose stuff. But the actual statement of guilt is a good feeling. We're not talking about the depressive, self-loathing, excessive guilt, but rather a statement of, I know I haven't lived up to my highest standard. So in a relationship, if I have violated it and I felt terrible that I have disappointed someone and I've taken advantage of a situation that is very, very special to me and I have ruined it, I've caused that, the next time a situation presents itself when I have to make a decision, that experience of guilt is actually a really good emotion to have. It helps make a better decision in your future.
Just talking about guilt, I'm reminded of my mother, my Italian mother. And she is not a stranger to guilt by any means. I think she's one of the forefounders of the entire emotion. But she was saying recently that when she moved to Florida, it didn't occur to her how sad it must have made her mother, who still lived in New Jersey. And so she started to cry and feel guilty about it. And I reminded her that your mother's been dead about 15 years. She said, I know, but this is my opportunity to feel guilty about that now. I said, what a great concept, retroactive guilt, Mom. I'm going to think about writing on that someday.
And we have the opportunity of really being experts about that by virtue of having an Italian mother and a Jewish mother. So when it comes to guilt, we've got it covered.
Can I just ask you a question? I've worked with combat veterans. I've worked with combat veterans from predominantly Vietnam era, and I found that the presentation of emotion is almost always anger.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the treatment is to ask what's under the anger, and it's almost always sadness and loss.
Yeah.
And survivor guilt.
That's the other factor as well. So I was just wondering how you deal with that configuration of overlapping. If you had the Venn models, you'd see all these overlapping circles and inside one of anger.
I have two conflicting thoughts. One is to dive into the answer, and the other is to save it to chapter 10 when we get into all the healing stuff. So what would you guys prefer? How is your ability to delay gratification?
But I do have one.
Sorry?
I do have one for that.
You want to do it now?
Well, no, actually, in terms of what the prevention curriculum that we've created with the social black belt, we know from longitudinal research that in fact, if you don't, the two factors we always want to start with the prevention curriculum are feelings identification and communication skills. If you don't know how you emotionally experience the world, you're more likely to act out on it. So feelings identification, communication skills. If you know how you experience the world, but you don't have the ability to communicate it, you're more likely to act it out. So those are always the two foundational principles in order to get someone to be involved with getting to the point where they can release actively.
Okay, so we gave you that to tide you over, and then I'm going to hit you with the chapter 10 stuff a little later on that. Please remind me, though. Thank you.
Obviously, it was a good answer.
Let's get into the second truth. The myth is once we have a behavioral compulsion, we're going to have this for the rest of our lives. The truth is, you can change your compulsive behaviors if you change your thoughts and address your feelings and learn some new behaviors. We want to share with our patients and also with the young people that there's good news. Just because you've learned to do something counterproductively, just because you're involved in something that's compulsive, something that's negative, it doesn't mean that you cannot learn to change it, to heal the underlying emotions and learn some different behaviors.
By the way, I'm just assuming the lights are connected to some Morse code system. This is impressive. We always want to be able to say, again, when your patients come in, they will talk to you about some specific experiences that they have that are habitual. They'll talk about their patterns. As you can see here, we've got 3 of them. I want to talk about that middle one up there. Every time I feel worthless, I shop. ... One of my patients came in, very nice young lady, however, long history of low self-worth, didn't feel as though she fit in, was normal, was liked necessarily. As she goes through life, she has now been seduced by the social trappings that we have that present about how you look, what you dress, what you drive, etc. So she tends to go to the International Mall in Tampa. She loves to shop there because there's a couple of stores where she goes to where she gets treated like a queen because she will buy thousands of dollars of clothing and items and accessories and accoutrements. She can't afford it, and she will not wear them because she does not need them. But when she feels worthless, she goes and does retail therapy, and she will shop, and they will treat her special, and she will bring all the bags home and sit it in the living room and stare at it. And a couple of weeks will go by, and she realizes, I don't have the money, and I can't let this stay on the credit card because I'm going to get hit with the interest on this. So habitually, she goes back to customer service at 8:30 at night before the mall closed. There's different people who work there, and she returns this. And her method of addressing her low self-worth, her sense of worthlessness, is to do this short-term reaction and this compulsive pattern of behavior. And not until she began to look at what the triggers were in her life, what her internal thoughts were, and how this compulsive behavior actually was reinforcing for her, we needed to be able to help her see that. Before that, she wasn't able to address it.
So let's take a look at some properties of compulsive behaviors and how they work. First thing that we know is that they actually alter the brain chemistry. They make us feel something that we want to feel, and they help us to stop feeling something that we don't want to feel. Compulsive behaviors work. If they didn't work, we wouldn't do them. Outside of just about any office building in America, somebody might be smoking cigarettes. And they're not smoking cigarettes because of what it's doing to them. They're doing it for what it's doing for them. And what is it doing for them? At the very least, it's really hard to not do it once you've been doing it. It does work. But I would ask you, try to imagine anytime you've driven past a building and you saw someone outside smoking a banana peel. A banana peel. Well, you've not seen that? You know why you don't see it? Because it doesn't work. Bananas would be great to smoke because you could open them up, eat the fruit, which is good for you, and then smoke the peel. It would be wonderful. But no one does it because it doesn't work. So we always like our patients to know that whatever you're doing makes sense because it does work. It is meeting a need of yours, or you wouldn't do it. And these behaviors persist despite consequences. That's another one of the truths about compulsive behaviors. So I keep doing the gambling, I keep losing all of this money, and I'm still drawn to continue to do this. Why? Not because I want to put our family into bankruptcy, not because I want my wife to divorce me, but because, again, the feelings work. In the short term, they gratify me, they meet some needs, they cause biochemical changes in the brain. There's something in it for me. Now, here's another property of compulsive behaviors. Compulsive behaviors are oftentimes no longer linked with the original reason that we started doing them. They have what's called a functional autonomy. Does anybody remember that phrase, you psychologists? It's a psychologist named Gordon Allport. Let me explain my understanding of functional autonomy and how it works with compulsive behaviors. You're a 13-year-old girl and you start smoking cigarettes. And you do so, why? You want lung cancer? No. Why would you do that at 13? Peer influence. You want to be more mature. You want to seem grown up. You think it's cool, whatever. Now, skip ahead a couple of years. You're 46 years old and you're still smoking cigarettes. What does that have to do with the original reason? Nothing. You are not smoking anymore to be cool. You are not smoking to fit in. In fact, you no longer fit in our society. You poor people have to go out in the street somewhere behind a building, and then people still go, somebody's smoking. It's just, now we're terrible to smokers. But the point is, there's an autonomy to that behavior that's no longer linked to the original reason. And if you can help somebody get in touch with the original reason why they started, that's nice, but it's not going to stop them from going outside in a half hour and smoking again. So understand that compulsive behaviors now have an autonomy of their own.
In this slide, we have one individual who turns to another and he indicates, I'm a man of my word. Once I've made a wrong decision, I stick to it. And it is amazing how many individuals, even though they're aware that their behavior leads to a poor outcome, continue to engage in that behavior. The fourth of these pertaining to compulsive behaviors. Again, the first one deals with the way it affects the brain. If it doesn't change the chemistry in the brain, you wouldn't do it. Second one, obviously, as you just heard from Dr. Cortman, goes to whatever started is usually not the reason why someone continues and persists. That in fact it has developed a life of its own. That there are lots of consequences, yet still continues. And this fourth point is there is a predictable pattern. And that helps our patients to understand what they need to do in order to make a difference in their lives. One of the things that we were taught at Hopkins from the head of psychiatry was from Dr. Paul McHugh, who talked about motivated behaviors. And there is this 4-step cycle that compulsive behaviors go through. And when you work with your patients, you can share this with them and you can walk them through it. And the reality is that each individual, each one of you, all of us, have triggers in our life. We can refer to that as the perceived stressor. The orbital frontal cortex of the brain lights up immediately. 2 neural pathways follow, one to the hippocampus, long-term factual memory, and one to the amygdala, the emotional cortex, the limbic region, our feelings. It lights up a nanosecond ahead of time, which is one of the reasons why we end up having an emotional reaction. So what we end up having is a perceived stressor. For each one of us, it's different. That individual then has intrusive thoughts or intrusive feelings. And the obsessive thoughts, the intrusive feelings could be, oh my God, death, terror, horror, look out. I'm going to be embarrassed. Oh, she may reject me. Oh, I better not do that. No, let me not turn in this work right. I have these fears of the worst case scenarios. I have these thoughts of incompetence or ineptness, fears that might take place. And then I have to figure out, so you see it at 12, it's the perceived stress. 3, it's the intrusive thought, the intrusive feeling. 6 o'clock on there, when we look at this kind of cycle, this kind of representation, is that repetitive behavior. What have I done in the past? What options do I have? Well, I know. There's that thing that shuts off that neuro pathway. Whatever that compulsive behavior is, which Dr. Cortman was saying, works. Though it may be counterproductive, though it may not be helpful in the long term, the individual experiences short-term relief because it shuts off the neural pathway. You've taught yourself this unhealthy behavior, this repetitive behavior, works. Perceived stress, intrusive thoughts. How am I going to deal with it? Oh, that behavior. I get short-term relief. There's a dog. Oh my gosh, I'm terrified of dogs. I got bit when I was a child. I'm now 25 years older. I come walking out of a store and there is a baby Cocker Spaniel, big floppy ears, big paws, licking a baby, and I'm thinking Cujo. It's going for my jugular. I just know it. I just know it will, so I dash across the street. Phew. I've avoided that situation, that stressor. Suddenly the neural pathway is shut down. I no longer have that fear going on in my body until somebody else walks out with a little one of those teacup little, chihuahuas. Oh my God, it's going to go after me again. Now I got to walk in the middle of the street. Our fears, our phobias are a great example of this compulsive type of behavior. We all have individuals, our patients that we're working with, perceived trigger that leads to obsessive thoughts, intrusive feelings, which then leads to how am I going to handle it? Oh, that compulsive behavior. Because it decreases the neural pathway, the firing in the brain, it shuts it off. So what we want to be able to learn is where we start talking to our patients about you have a trigger in your life. When you have that trigger, take a look at this representation. What are going to be the more productive behaviors that you're going to select? Because you're going to have these intrusive feelings and you're going to have these obsessive thoughts. How are you going to be able to manage it? What are the coping skills? And that's what we teach. And when you start teaching breathing exercises, visualization, options that they can exercise, changing their structure in their life, when they start engaging in these newer adaptive coping skills and surviving, they rewire the neural pathway. Now they take control of it. And the amazing thing is once our patients start rewiring the neural pathway, their perception changes. It's no longer causing the stress that they had. So it's coping skills first, then it's changing one's perceptions. Sure. In life, if you just imagine the lower axis, the x-axis is time that passes. We all develop new coping skills. And as you can see from the angle of our arrow here, with time increases coping skills, which is delightful. Problem is, what we're talking about in this chapter are those repetitive behaviors, the compulsions. Once you develop a compulsion, some repetitive pattern to handle those stresses, you do not develop. You stay stuck at that time of development. And you can see there's a little variety of different coping skills that people use. And that could apply to any situation.
And one of the coping skills that we like teaching, of course, is yoga. And some people have more advanced skills in yoga than others. As you can see, this gentleman is a master. And
inward, downward dog. The great thing is once someone enters into a counseling relationship and has an opportunity of taking a look at what they need to do in terms of coping skills to those perceived triggers and those obsessive thoughts, we have an increase in the coping skills. They are older, wiser, more mature. They understand how they apply to the world, so their ability to develop new coping skills, it is at a faster clip.
We like to teach people that there are 3 different ways to change how you feel. That's it, 3 ways. You want to change how you're feeling? Let's get down to basics. The very first way, we all know, is biochemical. And so you can drink something, smoke something, snort something, inject something, swallow a pill. You are doing that to change how you feel. According to some of the best estimates, alcohol will always be a problem on planet Earth because it really, really works so well to reduce stress and anxiety. And everyone knows that you can take something in an effort to change how you feel. It's the quickest way, it's an easy way, you don't have to learn a lot of new skills. So if you want to be forecasting into the future, there will always be drug and alcohol issues because that's one way to change how you feel. But the second way to change how you feel is through your sensory motor system. And that is to say you can run, you can jump, you can laugh, you can cry, you can even express feelings. You know the research on psychotherapy changing the brain? Because even by expressing our feelings and releasing them, it changes how we feel. So one of the best things we can ever teach someone is that if you're in a low mood, if you're in a funk, go for a walk, go for a run, go for a swim. Do something physical because that changes how you feel. But the third way to change how you feel is the most permanent way, which is to change how you think. By changing how you think about something, you can permanently change how you feel about it. And there's a psychologist named Gary Emery who came up with a concept that I really like called focus equals energy. And his premise was that wherever your focus goes, your energy follows. So sometimes you could be in a really down mood and then a friend calls. And within minutes you're laughing and you're having a good time and you literally forgot about the funk you were in because you changed your focus. When I say that changing your thinking changes how you feel, it doesn't mean that you have to rethink everything in your life, but I do ask my patients to rethink everything in their lives that are not working. Sometimes it's just a matter of shifting my focus from one thing to another. My favorite focus equals energy story has to do with a woman who's done a fantastic job of dealing with a 20-plus year history of agoraphobia, a pretty extreme agoraphobia where she could no longer drive anywhere by herself. And she came to hear Dr. Shanitsky and I talk about anxiety at Sarasota Memorial Hospital 2 years ago. And she was so proud of herself because she was there. And she told us that. She said, I want to get started in therapy. And you know, she lived a lot closer to where I work. So she came in to see me, and she bought a book, and right away she started to do everything I asked her to do, incredibly motivated. In our first session, I said, what I want you to do is get in the car and back out of the driveway, and then pull right back in. And she thought that was so easy that she started to drive around her neighborhood. And this woman, literally in 4 sessions, made reservations to take a trip to Europe with 4 girlfriends. And so here's the focus equals energy part of the story. She has this tremendous fear of the Skyway. It's like the granddaddy of her phobias. By the way, do you know what that fear is called? Little trivia. Gephrophobia, have you heard of that? Fear of crossing bridges? There you go. There's your trivia phobia for the day. Anyway, she goes to Germany and other countries with her friends. Her husband picks her up. He's taken her home, and she's telling him about this fantastic vacation, the restaurants they went to, the sights that they saw, how beautiful Germany is. And at one point, he's driving and he looks over at her and goes, hey, Chatterbox, are you going to get under the seat or not? We just passed the Skyway. And she turned around and realized that we had already crossed it. But her focus, instead of on being absolutely petrified, that she always used to climb under the seat, her focus was on Germany. She wasn't on the Skyway. She was in a European country, far, far away. And that was a turning point in her treatment, because then she knew, of course I can cross the Skyway without being afraid. I did it. All I had to do was put my focus elsewhere. Focus equals energy, and we can use that to help patients to go far away from things that frighten or upset them or overwhelm them. So those are the 3 ways that you can help your patients understand, here's how to change your feelings. Number 1, biochemically. Number 2, through your sensory motor system. And number 3, cognitively. Change how you think, you change how you feel.
I had a young lady who was afraid of flying, and she had 3 friends who invited her to go to Europe, and this is now going back a couple of years for our treatment. And she said, I can't miss this opportunity. One of the friends had lived in London, the other friend had lived in Paris and spoke French fluently, and the other one lived in Italy and spoke Italian fluently. She said she couldn't miss the opportunity, but she had never flown. She was terrified of flying. So this idea, she had been placed on medication and that wasn't able to help her. Her ability to just kind of do relaxation training wasn't enough, and so we were able to actually work with her to be able to understand a multitude of different treatment options. That if she needed her medication, she could have it with her, but that was a fail-safe opportunity for her to be able to understand when her heart starts pounding, when her respiratory rate increases. She can actually address that versus just panicking and going into a fear-based experience. Her negativistic thinking, we can talk about cognitive restructuring. We were able to work on relaxation training, visualization, and as Dr. Cortman was just talking about, changing her thought. If I was to ask you this, think about a funny television show or a movie. Just something that you would think is funny. It may not be funny to me, but it's funny to you. Right now, I'm asking you just to focus on that. Let me just ask you, are you anxious? Wouldn't be anxious. It's an incongruent emotion. If someone understands that there are incongruent emotions, they can actually choose what their focus is going to be on. She actually did Sudoku, talked to her friends, brought her iPod. She went through all that. We did successive approximations. We showed her that we can actually get her to the airport. We actually did therapy at the airport. We went into one of the Lear jets, did therapy in there, flew to Orlando, came back, and she was able then 2 weeks later to send me a text message of a picture on top of the Eiffel Tower. The amazing thing is if you help your patients understand these compulsive behaviors, in fact, can be addressed by changing their thoughts and changing the perception. But we have lots of people who don't change, and this is just going to be real brief because we do an entire day training specifically on motivational interviewing and the stages of change. What we want to be able to emphasize is there's 5 parts to the stages of change. And the 5 parts are someone is in the pre-contemplative, which means that they're either ignorant to knowing that there needs to be a change, or they could be, as we were hearing from Dr. Kaslow, the idea of anti-contemplative, which would be the pre-contemplative. It's the defiant, the oppositional, I can do whatever I want. It's the democratic disease model. I'm not going to address this at all. So it's the hyper-resistant, it could be, or the ignorant. Then you can only move one stage at a time to the contemplative, where they're actually weighing out the pros and cons, cost and benefits, action and inaction. Still not changing. If someone finally gets to the point where they're going to say, I'm going to stop this inappropriate behavior and start something good, they're in the preparation phase. Still not changing. They can only move one at a time. Got to get all your ducks in a row. Friends start, to get them to be helpful. An end date's already scheduled. 4th one is finally the action stage. That's when people are taking care of the behavior. The problem is, we've all done New Year's resolutions, and many of them have relapsed back. So just because you're changing doesn't mean you've changed. 5th one is the maintenance phase. That means you've been out for at least 5 months, 6 months out, and now it becomes a lifestyle. Individuals who do not change are not oppositional. They are not defiant. They are not resistant. Those are words we come up with to take responsibility off of us. If you look at clinical motivational interviewing, it speaks how it's a partnership. We just didn't assess our patient and understand where they were at with their readiness to change and force them into a gold standard model of changing. The reality is we need to find out where our patients are at, work with them, be able to speak to them, and move them in a healthier direction.
Truth number 3. I don't know how or why I behave like this, I just do. But the truth is, every behavior has an underlying purpose. Everything that we do for a reason or reasons, and there's always a payoff. To me, this is one of the most important truths because we want people always to know that they get something from what they're doing. And you can show me the most bizarre human behavior you've ever seen, and I might look at that and say, I agree, that's pretty bizarre, but I'll guarantee you that that person is getting something from it. How many of you deal with youth who are cutters? What do they get from that?
A variety of things.
Yeah.
What do they get?
Well, I would say not necessarily in this order, but when they are found out, it's a cry for help, an easy cry for help. Many of them have told me, though, that it eases the pain internally as they feel the pain. It also depends on what utensil they use. Some purposely use not such a sharp knife so they can actually feel it. Others use razor blades because it's less painful for them.
I use a spoon.
You use a spoon. Another interesting thing that came across my practice about 8 months ago was apparently there was a YouTube video about cutters, and it seemed to spawn other adolescents to try it.
Copycats. Copycats.
Yeah, copycats. I don't know whatever happened to that. I did not view it myself, but as a result of that, the client I was working with at the time, and who was in the process of healing, made her own YouTube video about why not to cut anymore, and the impact of what that video had on younger people. She was 16 at the time, 15 or 16, and she was very upset about it because of the impact on younger people that actually assisted in her healing.
And so if we threw out a number of behaviors to you that people do frequently that we would think are negative behaviors, like lying. Why do people lie? Basically because they fear the consequences of telling the truth. It's really not more complicated than that. You know, my colleague, Dr. Jill Scarpolini, told this story to me one time about her 2-year-old son. And she walks into the room where he is, and books are everywhere. And she looks at him, and he looks up at her, and he says, "Mess." And the true psychologist that she is, she says, "Yeah, I see that. How do you suppose it got that way?" And he just looks up at her, and he says, "Grandpa." 2 years old, and he already knew how to lie. And why was he lying? Not because he's pathological, not because he's bad, he's adorable. What he is fearful of some kind of consequence. So he figured he would just tell that Grandpa did the whole thing and get away with it. What we do for reason or reasons, and it's really important to help your patients get to the bottom of what they get from things. Because behavior, as we know, Psych 101 stuff, if it's reinforced, it has to work, then it's likely to be what? Repeated. So why do people gossip? Why would you gossip? I don't know about you guys, but if I ever start a sentence with, "Did you hear what happened to," all eyes in the room are now on me. I have some good, juicy stuff. I'm getting attention. There are people who are now thinking that I have something important to say because I'm gossiping. It's not so much that I have a desire to hurt someone else, it's that I want to draw attention to myself. Alfred Adler, how many people have read his work, the Neo-Freudian? Alfred Adler talked about 4 goals of misbehavior in children. Do you remember these? He said, any time that a child misbehaves, take a look at these 4 goals, because behavior is purposeful, there are always goals, and even when people misbehave, there are goals. The first one of these, every parent in the world can tell you. Sometimes you act out for what? Attention. Sure. That you have the kid in school whose name is never called out in class for doing well, for giving smart answers, for getting A's. He quickly finds another way to get his name called out, right? But there are 3 other ways that Adler talks about, or 3 other goals, I should say, to misbehavior. One of these is for control and power. By misbehaving, I now have control. By the way, that's one of the things about the cutting. I now have control over my pain. It's not just this vague emotional pain. I get to control it. And it feels good because it comes out and I can stop it. But the third goal of misbehavior that Adler talked about was revenge. I'm angry, I feel powerless as a child, and I know darn well how to punish you, because all I have to do is not look at you, not answer your questions, go to my room, and I have punished my parents. Or I can take something that I know is important to them and mistreat it, like my baby brother. That's a way of saying to my parents, I'm upset with you, I'm misbehaving because I want revenge. But the 4th way, or the 4th goal, I should say, that no one really talks about as to why children misbehave is a display of inadequacy. Sometimes children act out as their way of sending a message that I'm really not okay with myself. I'm not doing well right now in life, and I'm doing some things so I can call attention to just how miserable I feel in my own skin. I want you to know this. And you've all seen stories, or heard stories, I should say, of people who leave their marijuana out or something that they're doing so their parents will find it. You know, even people who are cheating on their spouse will sometimes leave obvious clues. Sometimes people misbehave because they want to draw attention to just how incredibly unhappy they feel and how inadequate they are.
Those repetitive behaviors, they happen for a reason. Remember, they shut off the neural pathway. Sesame Street. Bert walks in and sees Ernie. Ernie's got a banana in his ear. Bert asks Ernie, "Ernie, what are you doing with a banana in your ear?" And Ernie says, "Well, that's to keep the elephants away from Sesame Street." Bert says, "There aren't any elephants on Sesame Street." And Ernie says, "See, it works." The repetitive behaviors, they happen for a reason. They shut off the neurotransmitters. You get short-term relief without any long-term gain.
We want to talk about why people hold on to things. All psychologists know what we just talked about as to the goal-oriented behaviors and things that are reinforced will recur. But I'm impressed by how few psychologists ever talk about why we hold on to things like emotions. And so we want to talk about, remember we talked in chapter 1 about these different emotions and what messages they send? In chapter 3, we want to talk about why people keep these emotions, including for many, many, many years. You know, we have all this research now about how toxic resentment is. And all things being equal, if I'm resentful and you're not, I'm going to die before you. I'm more likely to sustain a heart attack, a stroke. I'm more likely to succumb to major depression, clinical anxiety disorders, all because I'm harboring resentment. You should see the research on it if you haven't. Resentment is very, very toxic. And yet we have so many people walking around with tremendous resentment and not even knowing that they're keeping it. And so we like to talk about 4 different reasons why people hold on to resentment. I can't tell you how many sessions in the course of my life where we spend saying, okay, we know this is bad for you, this resentment, but let's find out what it's doing for you. Remember, people don't do things because they want to do bad things to themselves. They're doing it because of what it does for them. That's the big emphasis in chapter 3. If you're doing something, let's find out what you're getting from it, and let's see what we can do to help you replace it with something healthier. One of the things I learned in clinical psychology is never take something away from a patient without replacing it with something else. So, here's 4 reasons why people hold on to resentment. The first one of these is that the moment I let go of my pain and my anger, I am now 100% responsible for my own happiness and success. That is absolutely huge, because if I say I'm no longer going to blame my father for abandoning me, my ex-wife for running off with my best friend, my business partner for screwing me, whoever it is that I'm harboring this resentment for, the moment I say I'm done resenting them, I am now responsible for being happy and for being successful. Want to take the next?
Sure thing. Remember, if I'm harboring resentment, I'm holding up guard. I have my walls up. I had been hurt in the past, so I will never allow myself to feel this again. So I can't allow you or anyone else to even get close. Problem is, that's what it's doing for me. It's protecting me. But at the same time, it's preventing me from actually experiencing life. So in this case, if I stop resenting and blaming, I leave myself open and vulnerable again to be taken advantage of. And no one wants to feel that, so people keep resentment in order to protect themselves from ever experiencing that type of vulnerability or pain.
It sort of reminds me of a line in a Billy Joel song called An Innocent Man, that some people find it easier to hate than to wait anymore. If I keep my resentment up, then no one has the access to hurt me again. But let's talk about a really common reason for holding on to resentment that most people don't understand. And this is often the one that people will say, that's the one, doc. That's the big one. And this is the one that if I release my resentment, if I let it go, then the other person got away with it. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to them. And that means the world is unfair. This is not just. They did something bad, and I'm supposed to let it go. How can I do that? Because if I let it go, it feels like I'm doing what? I'm condoning their bad behavior. No, you're not. You're not condoning their bad behavior. You're letting yourself off the hook, not them. The resentment is your cancer. It's your poison. By hating another person, you know, who said this in the Eastern world? It's like drinking a poison and hoping someone else dies. And so the understanding that I've been keeping my resentment for all of these years because if I let it go, the world is unfair and someone hurt me and got away with it. It's just such a, you know, the light bulb goes on in somebody's head. Now they have the ability to say, well, that's stupid. Why would I keep doing this to myself? It's time for me to actively, because healing is active, it's time for me to release this.
I love to say to my patients that if you're holding on to resentment, it is a toxin that poisons the vessel that carries it. The fourth one, you oftentimes see this when you're working with with couples, and when you're working with individuals who are paired up, when you're working within a family. If someone's holding on to resentment, what oftentimes happens is they're saying they want to move forward and they want to work on whatever it is, and they're starting to develop new coping skills, and they seem to be able to be moving forward. All of a sudden, one of the individuals brings up this thing from the past. It's the ace in the hole. It's my ability to stab you in the back. You remember, you did this before. I win the argument. Thanks very much. I'm out of here.
And we see this all the time where there's been infidelity, that one person refuses to let go, and they're having a fight about something, and he or she will say, well, I'm not the one who cheated on you. And the other one says, that was 15 years ago. That is nothing. Can we just let... No, I'm not going to let that go. It's my club. I take it out at every opportunity, and I win. Of course, you can never win an argument with your spouse because it's like your right arm beating up your left arm. If you win, you lose. Okay, let's move on from why do people hold on to resentment to worry. There's so many people that are bogged down by worry. In fact, one estimate that we read is that 1/3 of the population are chronic worriers. People that you could walk up to any time of the day and say, what are you worried about? And they'll tell you, because if they're awake, they're worrying. Why would people spend that kind of energy on worrying? Well, remember, we don't do things unless we get something from them. What does worry do for us? Worry is pseudo-control. As long as I'm worried about something, it feels to me like I am doing something about it. In order to release worry, I experience that V word, vulnerability. I don't like to feel vulnerable, so by worrying, I am actively staying attached to my fear. Now, here's the real beauty of worry. It works. Not really. But it feels like it does, because the vast majority of things we worry about never happen. Who was it? Was it Mark Twain who said something like, the worst things in my life have never happened, or something better than that? But the point is, I have all kinds of fears and fantasies of terrible things happening, and as long as I worry about them, it feels like I'm staving them off, and then I never have to experience them. So we tell a story about a mother who has a son who has to go back to college. And they're in Florida, and his college is in Pittsburgh. But the problem is, it's pouring rain outside. And so she says to him, do you really have to go? This is terrible weather. And he says, Mom, the flight's leaving. I doubt they're going to say, hey, Ed's mom's not going to let him go. Let's wait. So he says, it'll be fine. And what does she say to him as he's leaving? The moment you land in Pittsburgh, call me. So he says, yeah, of course I will, Mom. So Ed goes to the airport and he hops on the plane. And what does Mom do? She goes right to sleep, right? No, she doesn't. She puts on the Weather Channel and she's watching this thing. And then she's pacing and she prays to God and she says, I'm going to leave my son with you. And then 5 minutes later, she says, I'm taking back my son from you. I can't just let this go. She has to worry. And then 3 hours later, she gets a phone call from Ed. And Ed says, Mom, I'm good. We're here. And she says, phew, I did it. I did it. She knows in her mind that all that energy, all that worrying landed him safely in Pittsburgh. So what do you think she's likely to do the next time he flies? What do you do with behavior that's been reinforced? Worry works. That's why your patients are going to worry all the time about everything important. How do you know it's important to them? How do you know they're invested in it? Because they're worried about it.
Had a mother, husband, and son come in for therapy. And a lot of our patients talk about things that have been with them for years. And the son was getting ready to go off to college. 10 years earlier, his older brother, her eldest son, died of a very long, very painful medical condition. And she emotionally didn't realize this, but she never wanted to feel that type of pain and suffering again. And so she walled herself off from all emotions. Understandably so, she didn't want to suffer like that. But at the same time, as her son, who was getting ready to go off to college, said, "Doc, on that day, my brother didn't just die, my mother died too." And the husband was ready to say, "Listen, when my youngest goes off to college, I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life in a loveless marriage." And she realized that she had put herself into this self-protective kind of cocoon, and that she was at a point now where she needed to live again, and it was no longer harboring the feelings, "I would forget my son." The amazing thing for her in this case, why was she experiencing a psychological coma? Because it made sense. It protected her. It served a purpose. But it was also interfering with her life, and we needed to address that. So things can make sense, but still be very destructive, and helping our patients understand this is why they're doing it. There's a reason.
I'm going to do these next two very quickly because of time. Why do your patients stay stuck in sadness? How could sadness possibly serve them? What did I say sadness was about before? Loss. By staying sad, I keep the person I love alive. By staying stuck in the sadness, I don't have to bury them because it's my connection to them. As long as I remain sad, I don't have to let go. And so some people you'll see this, the room is still the same 6 years later after a child or a spouse dies. Nothing has been moved, no clothes have been given away. I can stay in that sadness because I don't have to accept the reality that I've lost someone so dear to me. And we would say clinically, well, of course you're sad. You know, that's a significant person. It's a tremendous loss in your life. But always understand that people have the ability to let go, to heal. It doesn't invalidate that you had a child that you loved. And it doesn't mean that you never think about them again, or that you don't celebrate, or that you don't have some sadness. But living in sadness 24/7 is a way of protesting. It's an adult temper tantrum. It's saying, I refuse to get on with my life because it's not okay with me that my son was taken away. Let's talk about guilt. Why do people keep guilt? Remember the dummy light in the car? Guilt is a wonderful thing, because if I see guilt, that should remind me that I have violated my own moral code. And so if I feel guilty because I did too much talking today and I didn't give Shanitsky a chance to talk, then the guilt light should go on, and that requires a response. And the response should be that I call him up and say, hey, I don't like how I'm feeling. I feel really bad because I did X, Y, and Z, and I felt like I should have done A, B, and C. I'm really sorry about that. Now that dummy light has worked effectively, because probably what I would hear is, thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate that. We're good. That's what guilt is for. But why do people hold on to guilt? Let me give you a story. There's a man and his wife who come to see me because their adult son has overdosed to death. And they come in one time together. That's it. And, you know, we talk about how they feel and so forth, and then I don't see them anymore. Until 2 years later, he comes in by himself. He says, I think I'm doing okay, but really, I can't get over this guilt. The guilt is horrible. And I say, well, you know, tell me about the guilt. He says, I just feel like there's something I should have done. Okay, Well, what did you do? Well, I put him in rehab a couple of times. I helped him out of a lot of jams. I did the tough love thing. I always encouraged him. I loved him. I spent time with him. I said, that sounds pretty impressive. What is it you should have done differently? He says, that's just it. I don't know. I don't know what I should have done. I said, let me tell you something. This has nothing to do with guilt. This is not about guilt. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're holding on to guilt in an effort to hold on to your son. The moment you accept that there wasn't anything you could have done differently, and you have to release the fact that you're powerless. This was not something you can control, and now you have to make peace with your son's death. Well, to make a long story short, we did some healing kinds of things, which we're going to talk about in chapter 10, and he did so much better. So I told this story. I was invited to speak to a group called Compassionate Hearts. And to qualify in this group, you have to have lost a child to death. That's a tough crowd. But in speaking to them, I told them that story. And a week after my talk, I got this beautiful card in the mail from a woman who said, thank you so much for coming and for saying what you did. I realize now that when my son died in my house under my watch, an overdose, that I have kept the guilt since that happened because that's my way of keeping him alive, and that I'm going to have to release that and make peace with what he did. She said, I'm not ready to do that today, but at least I know now why I'm holding on to that guilt. Why do you hold on to something? Because you think you need it. If I worked for Goodwill and I said to you, I need clothes, we have to sell clothes to make money, and you invited me into your closet, I might say, can I take this? And you might say, that old thing? Take it. And I'd say, well, what about this blouse? And you say, I didn't even know I still own that. Take it. I say, what about this? Don't touch that. That's my favorite dress. You would keep everything you thought you needed. When people hold on to emotional states, please understand they're getting something from them. And it's up to you as a clinician to help them understand what they're getting from them and give them the tools to release them, and so that they could replace that with something much healthier for them.